I've mentioned these things before, but I think the way I was taught to teach, there's a term for it. It's called a Gestalt method, which you take a particular subject. Let's say this little tip of the microphone is the subject. And you approach that subject from this direction, and you don't go off and find another subject. You take that same subject, and then you hit it from this direction, and then you hit it from this direction, and you hit it from this direction, and you hit it from this direction. So it's the same subject, but every time you go over the subject, you accentuate different facets of it. You know, one time I might concentrate on the shape of it, you know, the circle. Next time it might be the material, the wire. Next time it might be the pattern of the wire, the mesh system. So each time you're talking about the thing, but you're accentuating it in a different way. And so the overall effect, when you're done with all this thing, you really know about this microphone. That's the way I approach my style of teaching. I'm even going to go over some of the same verses that we hit last week. But the accent is going to be different. The approach will be a little bit different. So although it's the same verses here and there, the purpose is entirely different. One of the hardest things that we have to conceptually understand as human beings, because we are so hardwired into this physical world that we can't really get our heads around the fact that the spirit world is more real than the physical world. Because we don't live in the spirit world as human beings. We live in the physical. I'm standing on a floor. I'm breathing in oxygen. I have light, you know, photons and so forth of light reflecting off my eyes. I see physical people here. Everything that we do, everything that we think, everything about us is based on the physical, because that's the easiest thing for us to think in, because that's where we are. But God himself is not a physical being in his essence. There is a physical component to him, that's God the Son. But God the Father, in his pure essence as such, is spirit. So, if that's the case, and we stand back and we know that there's a physical world, we live in it, we're part of it. But on the other hand, we're told that God is a spirit. Now, God made the physical world. He sustains the physical world. The physical world is nothing more than a combination of atoms and molecules all spinning in certain speeds and certain concentrations and certain combinations. That's all the physical world is. It's the same building blocks, but they're put together in different ways and in different shapes and in different forms. We have the same chromosomes, the same DNA as every animal out there in the animal world. But how many chromosomes do we have? What is the makeup of our DNA? That's the only thing that separates us, but it's the same building blocks. The same building blocks that makes up this piece of paper are the same building blocks that I have within me. Take a bottle of vitamins sometimes, or minerals, and check out the things that are in those vitamins and minerals that you need. Zinc, iron, iodine. I mean, just go right down the list. They're all elements that we dig out of the ground. And then we read in Genesis, gee whiz, that when God made Adam, what did he make Adam from? He makes him out of the ground. The same building blocks. And so here we are, 6,000 years later, and if we don't eat right, we take supplements, we take vitamins, we take minerals, and gee whiz, it's the same stupid thing that's in the ground. It's not that far of a stretch. But we're so tied into the physical world that we can't conceptually understand that it is the spirit world. It is the real thing. God, a spirit, made the physical world. That if I make something, I'm bigger than the thing that I make. I'm smarter than the thing I made. I'm more powerful than the thing I make. It's the same thing with God. He made us. He's bigger than us, smarter than us, more powerful than us. He made the world. He makes the sun, moon, and the stars. He makes everything. He sustains everything. But he's the spirit. So in the pecking order of what is really real and what is the secondary thing here, gee whiz, it must be the spirit world. But, it's hard for us. John chapter 4, verse 24. John 4:24 says, God is a spirit. And they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. It doesn't say God is spirit. It says he is a spirit. This makes it almost like a personal type thing. This is his essence. He is a spirit. So the Indians and the Brahmins and the Hindus and so forth, they got it part right. When they said that God is in everything, everything is a God, they got it part right. God is everywhere. God is in everything, but everything is not God. That's where they blew it. So the cow's walking down the street. Oh, you can't kill the cow to feed the starving people over there because the cow is God. Oh, you can't kill the snake that are biting all the little kids and so forth because the snake is God. They blew it on that one. But they got it right that God is everywhere. God is in everything. But that does not mean that everything is God. Get that distinction. Something happens when we go through the Bible. I don't have any experience on a personal level with this myself. But there are a lot of examples in the Bible where when people have come in contact, physical contact with God, something happens. Everything changes for them. I'll give you as an example. David, 23rd Psalm. Third Psalm. You find it here. Presence of God changes everything. In the presence of God, or not, let me back up for just a second and say this, that in the presence of God, time is altered. Hold one finger there in Psalm 23, but turn to another passage here first. 2 Peter chapter 2, or chapter 3 rather, 2 Peter 3. Second Peter chapter 3, verse 8. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day. So time from God's perspective is not time the way that we view time. We view time, we break it down into seconds and minutes and hours and days and weeks and months and years and so forth. To us, time is lineal. You start here and you go forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We go forward. We can't go backwards in time. We don't have any experience in that. We don't have any reference point in that. It's an alien concept to us. We can't get our head around that. So with us, time is lineal, and time is sequential, and time is just an ordered thing. It's easy. But with God, there is no concept of time. He is not bound by time. It's not like God has a lot of time. God is just beyond time. To him, time means nothing. He made time. So once again, the maker is bigger than the makee, or the make it, or whatever you want to phrase it like. God is bigger than time because he made time. So one day is with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. Makes no difference to him. That's why we get so bent out of shape sometimes when we have a timetable. Oh Lord, you have to help me with this now. Oh Lord, I need this quickly. Oh Lord, I have to have this or else type thing. And God just sits there and nothing happens. We think, oh, the world's coming to an end. Oh, I can't live, and blah, blah, blah. And yet, somehow, it works itself out. And sometimes it comes out a lot better than what we had imagined. Revelation chapter 10. Revelation chapter 10. Verse 6. And start at verse 5. Revelation 10:5. And the angel, which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth, lifted up his hand to heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever and ever, that would be God, who created heaven, and the things that are therein are, and the earth, and the things that therein are, and the sea, and the things that are therein. This is what he's declaring. This is what he's saying. That there should be time no longer. So in the middle of the book of Revelation, God is going to just suspend time. There won't be any such thing as a sequential 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and so forth. Time shall be no more. So in the presence of God, everything that we know, everything that we experience is altered. It's changed. I haven't forgotten Psalm yet, but turn over to Isaiah chapter 6 first. Isaiah 6. This is some of the responses, just a couple of examples of people who have found, regular people, mortal people like you and me, have found themselves when they are literally in the presence of God. As I said, I've never met God. He's never talked to me audibly. I've never shaken hands with him. I've never seen him as such. But his spirit lives within me. His spirit sustains me. I know he made provision for my sins. I know that he's making me a home in heaven. I know that I'm going to be with him in eternity. All right, that's all one thing. That's fine and dandy. But I have never face to face come with him in the flesh before. And not very many people have. There's been a few. Something happens when a human being physically comes into the presence of God in that sense. Isaiah was one of them. Isaiah chapter 6, look at verse 5. This is Isaiah speaking, and he says, "Then said I, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." He comes into the physical presence of God, and the first thing that hits his mind is that I am a sinner. I am not worthy to stand here. I am a man of unclean lips. I live in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Woe is me. Revelation chapter 1. Jesus preached for 3.5 years, roughly. In that 3.5 year period, he had 12 main guys with him. Of those 12 main guys, there were 3 who were prominent. Of the 3 who were prominent, the Bible says that one of them was his best friend. So in that 3.5 year ministry, the Apostle John was Jesus' best friend. They were buddies. Time goes on. Jesus is crucified. He dies. He is resurrected. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years go by or so. John is an old man now. He's way up in his 90s. He's been exiled by the Roman Caesars to the Isle of Patmos. And there he sits. And one day he is visited by none other than Jesus Christ himself. And he is going to get a vision. And that vision is what we know today as the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 1. Verse 15. Well, verse 13. I always do that. Verse 13. "And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man," that's always Jesus Christ, "one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire." Now, this is the resurrected Jesus as such. This is God in the flesh now that he's seeing. Jesus comes down to him, he gives him a vision, and John opens his eyes, and he sees this person in front of him. The white hair, the eyes as flames of fire, and his feet, verse 15, "and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. And his voice is the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength." His best friend, 3.5 years, closer than you can imagine here. Verse 17, "And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. What was so shocking? I mean, John, 3.5 years he'd been with him. I mean, these guys sweat together, they cried together, they prayed together, they ate together, for 3.5 years. But all of a sudden, he's now not in the presence of Jesus of Galilee. Now, he is in the presence of Jesus as God, not the God-man, not tamped down so that we can converse with him and commingle with him like he was on earth. Now it is just unmitigated God standing before him. And he takes one look at him. And he falls down as if he were dead. Now, 23rd Psalm. David. The whole point of this is basically to help us to understand that circumstances in and of themselves is not the end thing. Circumstances are transitory. Circumstances are phases. Circumstances are temporary as such. We can grow beyond them. Circumstances can change. Things can happen in our lives that alter the present circumstances or change the possibility or the probability of future circumstances. So circumstances is not an in-bed, rock-solid thing that has to be that way forever. That's why people, have gone on about positive attitudes and so forth. Oh, well, you got cancer. Well, have a positive attitude. Maybe something will happen. Maybe they'll discover this. Maybe the treatment will work. Don't give up. And there's a lot of reality truth in that. Attitude makes the difference. We can overcome almost anything with attitude. Now, attitude, I think I can jump 50 feet in the air. No, we're not talking that kind of stuff. I mean, anybody can always bring up stupid excuses, stupid examples to try to put that kind of thing down. We know what we mean. Attitude is everything. You lost your job. Well, gee whiz. What are the responses here? What are the options? Well, I can go out and look for another job. Well, that's one option. I can sit here and live on welfare, if you're old enough. Well, that's another option. I can blow my brains out. Hey, that's another option. You have options. So the fact that you lose the job is not really the real reality here. It's how you respond to losing your job. That's what's going to determine your reality. It's the response. Somebody walks up, hits you in the nose. Well, you've got options. You can just sit there and take it. You can fall down and cry. You can, do this. You can fight back. There's a lot of things you can do. But what you do is usually based on your attitude. If you're a wimp, you're generally not going to fight back. You just sit there and take it and bleed. If you've got some guts and stuff, you'll fight back if you can. You'll make it tough for the guy. It's attitude. If you think that you can't do something, you've just about sealed your fate in that you won't do it. If you think you can, you have a fighting chance. David, 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. These are all great things, all positive things. Everybody would love to live in this life up to now. Lie down in green pastures. I don't know in this generation, in this culture where we live, Orange County, if anybody's ever done that before. But I remember as a kid living in rural Canada, pastures all over the place. Normal, natural. Middle of the summer to lay down in a nice green pasture and to smell the clover. And you see the little butterflies all floating around. It was a wonderful thing. Lead me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He rejuvenates you. He makes you whole again. Great things. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Wow, what a deal. First 3 verses. Absolutely idyllic, Edenic, wonderful life. But now the wheels are going to start to get wobbly. Verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. That's the key. He conceptually understood that God was with him. And if God is with him, who cares about the valley of the shadow of death at this point? Who cares about the boogeyman under the bed or in the closet at night? Who cares about dark alleys walking down? If God is with you, there is a certain confidence that you have. If God is with you and you know it, there is a certain reserve of strength that you have. That certain things just don't bother you. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because I'm the biggest, baddest guy in the valley? No. Because I'm the toughest guy in the valley? No. Because I've got more money than anybody else in the valley? No. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Not so much that God prepares a table before him, it's where he prepares it. He's in the valley of the shadow of death. God prepares him a table in the valley of the shadow of death, in the presence of his enemies. But what is the difference in all this? Why does he not care that he's in that valley? Why can he get through that valley? Why does the valley not overwhelm him with despair and anguish and fear and paralysis? Why is it that he can function in that valley? He gave us the truth. For thou art with me. I'll guarantee right now, I don't care what your scenario is, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, psychological, friend, relationship, bosses, I don't care what it is. If you walked into that situation and God was standing, literally, 6'2", 175 pounds, whatever, blue-eyed, Marlboro looks, the whole bit, whatever. If he was by your side and he walked in there with you, do you think that your attitude might be a little bit different about your circumstances than if you just had to handle it by yourself? You know they would. And this is the point David's trying to make. He says, I'm in a hole here. I've got problems. I'm in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death, and yet in that valley, I've got green pastures, I've got still waters, I've got a table prepared for me. His rod and his staff are going to comfort me. The whole thing contingents on one thing. He knew that God was with him. Moses, Exodus, chapter 34. Exodus 34. You remember the story? Children of Israel are in Sinai, in the desert. God calls Moses up into Mount Sinai. He's going to give him the law, 10 Commandments. God hews 2 stones out of the mountain, 2 tablets. And each one he writes 5 commandments. So Moses got 2 tablets. Moses is there for a period of 40 days and 40 nights. Exodus chapter 34, verse 28. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. Now, I said it a few minutes ago. Something takes place with us physically when we are in the presence of God literally. Moses is now in the presence of God himself for 40 days and 40 nights. A lot of people in history, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, if we go back to the days of Adam, have gone 40 days with no food. Some do it because they're fasting. Some do it because of medical conditions, maybe. Some do it because they're on hunger strikes. Some do it because maybe they don't have any food. On a desert island, marooned or something. Jesus did it. 40 days and 40 nights. So the fact that a human being can go 40 days and 40 nights without food is not that, it's a big deal, trust me. Most I've ever gone is 3. And they say that once you hit a certain peak, after 4 or 5 days, that actually the hunger does subside. And you don't really feel hungry anymore. Now your body just begins to start cannibalizing itself, and then if you don't eat at some point, then you will die. But the 40 days with no food is not that big of a deal. Nobody will tell you that the average person cannot go more than 3 or 4 days without water. That's the distinction here. He goes 40 days with no food, 40 days with no water. That is the distinctive thing in here. In the presence of God, do you think God is going to sit there? Oh, gee whiz, Moses, you've gone 3 or 4 days with no water. You've dehydrated to the point now that your brain isn't functioning properly and you're about ready to croak. Sorry, I had a 40-day schedule planned out for you here. I'd not blocked my calendar off for 40 days, and now you're going to croak after 4 days because you haven't got any water. Gee whiz, did I goof up? In the presence of God, Moses could have gone 400 years with no water. Doesn't make any difference. He's in the presence of God. The 3 Hebrew children, Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. You remember the story how King Nebuchadnezzar issued a rule that everybody, when they heard the music start, they all had to bow down and worship him as king. All right. No harm, no foul there. That's his prerogative. He's king. He sets the rules. 3 Hebrew kids said, hey, we already have a God, and his name is God. It's not Nebuchadnezzar. We're not going to bow down to you. The king said, oh, yes, you will. And they said, no, we won't. He said, then I'm going to throw you into the fiery furnace. So they have a big furnace there. And he's fixing to throw these guys in. And he gives them one last chance. He says, you going to do it? They said, no way we're going to do it. And he gets so irate, he gets so mad, he tells the guys, he says, make that sucker 7 times hotter than it normally is. So they just keep stoking the wood and the coal and whatever, the combustibles in there, and that fire gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. He says, throw them in. And the soldiers there grab these 3 kids, and they throw them in there, and the flames are so hot that it kills the soldiers that are throwing these kids in. They're dead as doornails right now. Daniel chapter 3, verse 24. Daniel 3:24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, we'd say astonished today, and rose up in haste. Now he's thrown the kids in. Soldiers that threw him in are dead. And he looks in those flames and he sees bodies walking around. He was astonished, and he rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? And they said unto the king, True, O king. 3 of them went in. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. Now remember, the soldiers that threw him in are killed because the heat was so bad. Nebuchadnezzar looks in. He sees 4 guys now walking around. He says, didn't we just throw 3 in? Yeah. I see 4. And they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Jesus himself, before Bethlehem, is in that furnace with those 3 kids. Nothing happens to them. The flames don't bother them. The smoke doesn't get in there. Their blood doesn't boil. Their skin doesn't peel. In fact, it says that when they came out, you couldn't even smell smoke on their clothes. What was the difference? They were in the physical, literal presence of God himself. 40 days with no water, you think that's going to stop God? A burning furnace, you think that's going to stop God? What about your life? I don't know what's happening individually. You know, we know the basics, but I don't know the heart. I don't know what your fears are. I don't know what your hopes that have been dashed. I don't know the frustration that you may be going through as you get to a certain point in your life and you look back and it's the woulda, coulda, shoulda type thing. I don't know if you're at the stage yet where you look back and say, gee whiz, I've got a lot more years behind me than I got before me, and I wanted to accomplish this, but I couldn't, and now the depression sets in, and the sense of failure sets in, and you go into this circle the drain spiral mode. I don't know what it's like with anybody else. But I know this, that there's enough examples in this book of people who have been in 10,000 times worse situations than us. But in the presence of God, that made it through. Paul, Philippians chapter 4. Well, if Moses didn't impress you, if the 3 Hebrew children didn't impress you, if David didn't impress you, let's bring it up a little bit so that in terms that we realistically can relate to, let's say. Philippians chapter 4, beginning in verse 11. Not that I speak in respect of want, Paul says. What he's talking about here, the gist of this is contributions to his ministry. Because he, he's an itinerant preacher. He goes from place to place to place to place to place to place, and the only means of sustenance that he had is the generosity of those who he goes and ministers to. So he goes to a church and minister, they give him a pile of money, enables him to hire the ship, the caravan or whatever. He goes to the next place, and he can sustain himself that way. So he goes from place to place to place to place. There was one place he got to, that's kind of a side thing, sorry. He gets to the city of Corinth. 1st and 2nd Corinthians in there. And for some reason, these guys don't really like Paul. They don't support Paul, and Paul is now forced, because nobody's giving him a salary, nobody's giving him any ministry money, nobody's giving him any donations or anything, so he is forced for a 3-year period to go back to his original trade, which was tent making. So he doesn't really suspend his ministry. He's still, preaching. He's still writing. He's still doing these things. But now he's constricted, and he has to take, the 8, 10, 12 hours out of the day that he normally would have been able to spend on ministry, and he has to go making tents. Boy, he rakes them over the fire for that. So, the opposite type of church is the church of Philippi. They gave him more money than he knew what to do with. So that's what he's talking about when he says, I'm not talking about want in this respect here. Not that I speak in respect of want, but I have learned. I have learned. Some of us never learn. I'm 76 now. There are a lot of things I haven't learned yet. People have tried to tell me. God has given me examples. He's put it right out there. But sometimes we're too dumb to see it. We can't connect the dots sometimes. But I have learned. Well, what did he learn here? Well, in this particular instance, I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. And if you can learn that, you've got it made. Life is going to be easy for you. I have learned in whatsoever state I am in, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, put down. Good grief, just read his resume of the junk that happened to him. And I know how to abound. Everywhere. And in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Verse 13, one of the most famous verses in Christianity. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. We've taken that out of context, really, and we've made that into a Superman verse. Oh yeah, I can do all things. I can, jump buildings with a single bound. I can stop trains with my bare hands. I can, bend steel and all that stuff. And we in Christianity have usually taken this particular verse to say, yeah, I can overcome any obstacle. I can attain any goal. I can do that. Everything is one direction. And that's not a bad thing. But Paul is trying to put balance into this thing. So he says, I know both how to abound, do good, and how to suffer loss. That's a big thing to get. I know how to have everything and have nothing. And it's in that context that he uses this verse. I can do all things. Have a lot, I can get by. Have nothing, I can get by. Succeed, I can get by. Failure, I can get by. Because he understood the overriding rule in this thing is not the way we do stuff, it's God in our lives. And if we understand that it's all God, it doesn't matter if I've got 50 cents in the bank or 5 million in the bank. Doesn't matter if I live up on the hill or if I live down under the freeway ramp. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Circumstances do not determine your reality. Your response to circumstances determines your reality. Heavenly Father, you've seen through the corridor of time all the billions, literally billions of scenarios that we as human beings find ourselves in. It's never the same. It changes moment by moment, day to day, hour by hour. Sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down. Sometimes we're doing good, sometimes we're doing bad. But the one consistency in the whole thing, Father, is you. You have promised that you will never leave us nor forsake us. Hebrew children can attest to that. Moses can attest to that. David could attest to that. You'll never leave us nor forsake us. You're there. And sometimes, Father, in this world, we get so beaten down, we get so intimidated, we get so afraid of the circumstances that we fail to realize and to remember that you're there. If we're hungry, you're going hungry. If we're afraid, you're there to comfort us. And sometimes we just don't remember and we don't realize that that's your purpose, is to help us. Father, help us to get to a point. Well, I'm talking individual now. I'm not talking family. I'm not talking any in this. Individual, personal. Help us each to get to a point that no matter what the circumstance is, that we in our hearts realize that God is bigger than the circumstance. And if God is gracious enough to give us a positive response to whatever that circumstance is, we won. We've won. Father, you said that if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of you. And I'm doing that right now. And I'm praying on behalf of these folks. Give us wisdom, that we can sort these things out on a personal level, on an individual level, on a moment-by-moment level. Help us, Father, please, to understand these things and to get them, so that we in turn can not just wallow around in our little cesspool of doubt and uncertainty and fear and misery, but that we can be used by you as a tool to reach somebody else, or to be an influence on somebody else. Get us out of ourselves, above the circumstances, so that we in turn can be used by you as an example. We ask in Jesus' name.